Let's continue working with the selection tools. I had the magnetic lasso image open that can be found in Chapter 2. Now you noticed when we were working with the marquee tools, we were very limited in selections that we could create. We could only make ellipses or rectangles. So in this section, we're going to take a look at the lasso tools. In this picture, we want to remove the background. We want to keep just the flower. And you'll notice that the petals are not circular and they're not rectangular in nature. So the lasso tools may be a good bet in removing our background. And we'll continue to explore other selection options in the rest of this chapter. So the lasso tool, if you click and hold on the lasso tool, you'll see we have the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso, and the magnetic lasso. So let's begin with the lasso tool. The lasso tool, you'll see we have a little lasso hanging on the edge of our cursor. And when I click and I drag, I can create a selection, any shape I want, by simply dragging my mouse. And as you see, I can follow the edge of my flower, and I can try and create a selection that would be my flowers so that I can remove the background. But you can tell that it's getting kind of difficult, and once I let go of my mouse, my selection closes. So this tool would be very difficult to use to make this selection for that reason. Holding onto your mouse that long and being able to manipulate it around the curves perfectly is going to be difficult. Let's do Command D or Control D to get rid of that selection. And let's look at the next one. The Polygonal Lasso works a little differently than the lasso tool. And when I click and I release, I can change the direction of my lasso, and my lasso is not going to close on me when I release my mouse. So you'll notice on this one, I can't click and drag. It's not going to do anything for me. I have to click, drag, and click. And every time I click, it adds to my selection. And you'll notice basically what I'm doing is I'm creating teeny weeny line segments. So the closer I get to my flower and the shorter distance between clicks, I can actually create a curved edge around the edge of the petal to create my selection. Again, this looks like it's going to be quite tedious, and I would probably want to zoom in so that I could see my petals better as I'm working. But you can see I already made a mistake there at the beginning. And if I wanted to keep going, it's going to take a long time. And to close this tool off, again, letting go of my mouse isn't doing anything, but at least I could take a break and then continue if it's, becoming tiring with my hand or I need to reposition my mouse. So when I double click at the end, then my selection closes. But obviously this tool isn't the right one for the job either. So I'm going to Command D or Control D to deselect it. Let's try the last lasso, the magnetic lasso. Now this tool works on color variants. Again, I'm trying to select my petals on my flower. Let's start here at the top. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to drag my mouse. And as I'm dragging my mouse, you'll notice that a selection is starting to be created for me. All I'm doing is dragging. I'm not clicking at all. I'm just dragging my cursor. And I'm following my cursor around the edge of the flower. And Photoshop is creating the selection for me along the edge of the petal. And you'll notice too that they're adding little squares are being created as I'm drawing as click points of my magnet, and a selection is being created. So with this tool, Photoshop is doing a really good job of creating my selection for me and going up the edge of the flower. So I didn't have to worry. I'm going back a little bit. I'm going to try again along the edge. I didn't have to worry about how often I'm clicking to create a curved edge with the polygonal lasso, and I don't have to worry about how perfect I have to be with my drag with the regular lasso. So this one, again, I'm just moving my mouse. I don't have the clicker except to start the first selection at the beginning to tell the tool where I'm starting. And now I'm just dragging the mouse around the edge of the flower, and it's telling the difference between the two colors that I'm selecting between. And for the most part, it's doing a really good job. So I'm going to keep going. And the neat thing about these selection tools is that you can start with one selection tool And you can make a selection, and then you can always go back and improve your selection with another tool. So I'm just going to keep following around my edge here. I'm trying to get inside that flower, and I'm going to come on back. So I'm just following my edge. And dragging along the flower. And you'll notice in the options panel, we could change the frequency of those little boxes that are coming up. And we could have adjusted the amount of contrast between the two things that we're trying to differentiate between to make our selection. So I'm going to come back up around and get back to where I began, because my goal this time is to actually get all the way around the flower, because I immediately found out with those other two tools that it was going to be too difficult. So I kind of abandoned those rather quickly. And you'll find there's different tools, different ways to make selections, and you'll become pretty good at them where you can actually decide which tool is probably the best one to use for the job you have at hand. So I'm back up to the beginning. Now I'm going to double click carefully, and I've completed my selection. So if we take a look at this, just at the selected area, you can see this did a pretty good job. I didn't really lose any parts of my flower, and I may have left a few areas where I have a little bit of green left. Now remember, back when we were working with the marquee tool, if I press delete at this point, I'm going to lose my flower because that's what's selected, not the leaves. So I'm going to have to inverse my selection. If you remember, we click on the word select on the menu at the top, and we choose inverse. Now we see our marching ants around the flower and around the edge of the document. So at this point, if I press delete, I don't want to use content aware. I want to change this to white. And I click OK. I'm going to go ahead and remove my selection, Command D or Control D. And I can see that the magnetic lasso did a really nice job of removing the leaves from around the flower. Now I do see some little areas where I could probably improve my selection. So let's go ahead and get the zoom tool, the Z on your keyboard. I can zoom in. And here I can see I have a little bit of issue here. So let me go ahead and go back to my Polygonal Lasso, because that's a small area. It's not too much clicking to do. And I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag with this tool to create my selection. Again, with the Polygonal Lasso, I'm clicking, dragging, clicking. Every time I click, it creates another point on my selection path, and I can change direction on my selection. I'm going to come back out here, I'm going to double click, and I'm going to close my selection. Now I didn't care too much that I went outside the green area because I'm just going to press my delete key. I was hoping to just get that portion of green between the petals. So I press my delete key. It gives me the option for white, which is the last thing I selected, and Command D, and I've removed it. I'm going to get my hand tool, and I'm going to come over here because I believe I had another problem on this one. Again, my Polygonal Lasso, or let's try the Lasso tool this time. Now remember, the Lasso tool, you actually have to click and drag, and you have to be a little bit more careful because you have to keep your mouse down the entire time, and once you release, it's going to close. Let me try that again. Again, I'm going to click and drag. I'm trying to follow the edge of my petal. I'm going to come back up, and I'm going to make sure I'm outside the area, and when I let go, it's going to close automatically. If I press delete, click enter, Command D or Control D to remove the selection, and there we go. Now that's not too clean of a selection, so I'm going to try the Polygonal Lasso. And you may find one tool easier to use than another. I seem to like the Polygonal Lasso because I can lift up my mouse between clicks, whereas with the lasso, again, if I let go, it closes on me.
Here's a tip though. As you become more comfortable with the Lasso tool, if you have your regular Lasso tool selected and hold the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on Windows, you will temporarily get the Polygonal Lasso tool so you can continue with your selection.
Let's get the Z for the zoom tool. Now let me show you, if you press the Alt key or the Option key on your Mac and you left click, you'll see the minus sign come up for your zoom tool. That's a quick way to zoom out rather than going up to your Options panel and clicking the minus sign. Now I can move over here. Let me zoom in on this section of my document. And let me get the Polygon Lasso again. And make me another selection here. Again, every time I click, I can change the direction of my line that's making my selection. Double click when I know I'm going to be able to close it outside the area, and delete to remove that section. Command D or Control D to get rid of your selection. And remember, we can double click on our hand to reset our image. So we could continue to go around there and just clean up those few little areas, but you can see how effective the various lassos can be, especially if you have a difference in color with the magnetic lasso, and then you can go back and clean it up with another selection tool.